Hello and welcome to this episode of Kennedy Saves the World. And today we are going to be discussing American icons. Myself and Brian Kilmeade among them.
Right. Finally talk about ourselves.
When are you going to write a book about us?
Right. Just us.
I mean, this Frederick Douglass, Lincoln,
Right.
Booker T, and Teddy Roosevelt. Like, they're good.
Right.
But we're great.
I always thought, would it be better to write about somebody dead or somebody that could sue me alive?
Oh,
Right?
definitely dead people. Because you can write anything about
Right.
dead people.
Absolutely.
What are they going to do?
Yeah. Teddy Roosevelt called. Nope. He doesn't.
He does not call.
Doesn't even know a phone.
No, but he was a fancy lad.
Right.
So he was.
What do you mean by fancy?
So he was sickly as a child, which I learned from your book. I didn't know that, but because we always think of Teddy Roosevelt. Oh, by the way, the book Teddy and Booker T, How Two American Icons Blazed a Path for Racial Equality.
And before we
get
go
your
any
copy
further,
now, it is out.
And also go to BrianKilmeade.com, find out where I'll be.
BrianKilmeade.com, signed books,
Right.
appearances, and a great Christmas and Hanukkah present right here.
Right.
Yeah.
You can get them for both. Mm-hmm. What was I going to say? Your knowledge of history is so underrated. People think, oh, she likes music. She's from MTV. Oh, she likes the news. But you actually love history.
I love
Am
history.
correct?
Yes. And I love the way you write because you write for people who feel like history still exists. Like we are still in the historical moment. And it's almost like you write in the present perfect. So we are there in the moment, even if we know what happened in the end. The story getting us there, there's so many details that you find
Right.
they're just wildly impressive.
Thanks. And what helps us is because we're doing an hour special, postponed because of the war, and it's going to be on later. But also what helps is to actually see the places. And what happens is when you see the places and then you actually get a tour or a family member, which this one, they're descendants. And they have like their albums, they help. We have pictures in there that have not been seen because you go to Tuskegee, they help out. Then they walk you around. So when you go and read the biographies of them or the autobiographies that they wrote, which are the best autobiographies when people write about themselves, as opposed to the unauthorized, right?
Yeah,
And
the
those are
Kitty
worst.
Kellys of the world.
And they go see what they were actually talking about. That to
But
me,
you
it almost
really
freaks me
do
out.
investigate
It's almost like time travel.
the primary sources. And a
Yeah.
lot of those primary sources are letters and diary entries. And, I thought it was very sweet because the dinner between Booker T and TR is, famous and emblematic. But you actually have the invitation and the response to the dinners in the book.
Because now we're in a situation where we have a president that uses emails and pseudonyms. So it's not really going to be down in history. It's a lot harder now in the days of I don't trust anybody. But back then, instead of calling up Booker T or BlackBerry, back then they were using BlackBerries. Not many people know that. I break that news in the book because of the keyboard.
What?
Right. It's fantastic. It's a great shot of Booker T using a BlackBerry, accepting the ability to build Tuskegee. So I'm rewriting history. So I'm kidding. By the way, people watching, I'm kidding. The BlackBerries were still a year or two off.
Yeah,
But-
he was using an Apple Newton.
So we would say, instead of Booker T, let's get a hold of Booker T. You either send a messenger or you write a note.
Yes.
And it gets over and it gets delivered. It's like, what does this say? Well, the president wants me to go over for dinner. He had a brief pause. He said, should I do this? He said, listen, new president, been there a month. I'm his advisor. He wants to know about the South. He wants the black vote. I'm going to go over. And he goes over. And he eats with his family. And you and I think it's no big deal. And most people, I guess, 2/3 of the country think it's no big deal. But 1/3 of the country think it's the worst thing that ever happened. At that point, a black man eating with a white family. What's going to be next? And as crazy as that was the story in certain sections of this country and states and families in this country. And it charters you change little by little. And really, since the Civil War, not fast enough. Compromise of 1876 that Bret Baier writes about. We have a hung-up election 10 years after the Civil War. There's 5 or 6 states where we can't get a clear winner. We could keep counting.
Yeah, and Rutherford B. Hayes really screwed the pooch on that one.
Samuel Tilden or Rutherford B. Hayes, who's it going to be? And the Democrats say, I'll give you President Hayes, Republicans, but get the Union
But we
troops.
have to return the South to basically the antebellum institutional racism so we can ruin people's lives and kill at will.
Right. But you jumped to the end. Instead, it was, promise me you're not going to go back to the way you were, and I'll move the troops out. And they say, you have my word.
Totally doing it, yes.
Yeah, totally doing
Word
it.
is stronger than oak.
Yeah, right. No. And then
No.
they said, no, we're going to do that.
Are you mad at Hayes for that?
I didn't study him well enough to know if he knew what he was getting into. After all, I'm picturing our country 11 years after of losing 600,000 people. Everybody that you knew lost someone directly or indirectly. Do they really want to not turn the page and risk blowing up the country again? Let's cut a deal.
Because if you blow up the country again, it's
We don't
falling
have a
apart.
country. We don't have a
It is
country.
flimsy. England and France
Totally
still sitting there
underappreciated.
like, come on, man. Like,
And they're like, these guys are going to survive this, come back together. If you put a betting person on that, you say, well, at least we have Lincoln. No, we don't have Lincoln. 1865, the Messiah that put it together, that said we got to fight to put it back together. Maybe we have to come apart. Now I'm going to stitch it together. And then John Wilkes Booth becomes what I think did more damage to to America than any single human being, including bin Laden, because Lincoln was that special, not perfect, but that special. If he had lived through the 1860s, if anyone was going to do a third or fourth term, this guy in his 50s probably would have done it, that everyone was beginning to realize how special he was. We wouldn't have needed the 1960s. I mean, would have been problems in the South? Absolutely. Would it have been a problem telling someone for 150 years that blacks were not as good as whites, and then you tell them to change on a dime? No. But those kids were less prejudiced. Those kids less prejudiced. And then when you see Booker T. Washington and you see Frederick Douglass, in Booker T. Washington's case, to finish the theme, and you see this man stand straight up, speaks the King's English, have the motivational talk, be able to grow an institution from 35 people
to
to
1,500.
to 1,500. And I
at
walked
least
on that
when
campus.
Roosevelt went there.
Yeah. So I don't even know if it was at 1,500 at that point.
It was
but-
because it was more people than were at Harvard.
And then when you think, even now, it reminds me, because my two daughters went to small upstate schools. It reminds me of that, only cleaner, more motivated, more prideful, because to what Tuskegee represents. So he goes there, forms this, and if you were, and you're not, if someone you knew was racist, he'd look at you, okay, I don't hate you, but I'm going to deal with the people that are not. And maybe you're going to see the way I act, see the way I hold myself, see my thousands of students that I'm putting out, see the contributions that they make, how smart they are, how polite they are, because he taught them about life. The first thing he did, he traveled through the area to find out what these people wanted, what they needed, because they're eating the same thing every day. They don't know how to eat. The hygiene, brush your teeth, how to clean, how to hold yourself, how to present yourself, how to look people in the eye. He had to do everything, and he put it into school. He goes, the parents said, okay, here are my kids. They're in college. They said, okay, your kid's going to learn a skill. So when they weren't in the classroom, they had to pick an occupation. So whether it was for women, by the way, women were teaching, seamstress, they would learn some construction,
Churning
be
butter.
a blacksmith, you're the best, you're still good at that. So they would all learn a trade. And almost Karate Kiddish, they would actually build the university. So when they were done, hey guys, we got to go build a building tomorrow. So they're learning it, being supervised. Like George Washington Carver was this leading edge agriculturalist, and he led the country in this way. He was a professor there. So then he was raising a whole bunch of other kids. So if you want to change people, don't yell at them, don't fight with them, don't mandate it. Watch.
And don't other them, because that's what we're doing now. If I feel that you have one contrary position to something that's very important to me, then you are automatically my enemy.
Right.
And I want nothing to do with you. I want to cancel you, and I want to aggressively push you out.
Which is crazy.
Yeah, it is crazy.
But we're
because-
living this life.
Because what Booker T was doing was very different. I think there's an interesting contrast there between him and Frederick Douglass, because Frederick Douglass just thought once people are free, like that is the ultimate God-given human ideal. Once they're free, we will all be equal. And he really felt that. And Booker T realized, like, no, there are a lot of jerks out there. And his practicality, like the necessity, what people needed to learn, and not things like Latin and reading classics like they were doing at Harvard, which, Roosevelt acknowledged, but he was almost like the Mike Rowe of his generation.
That was 2 years ago, maybe 3, is I was working on this before Frederick Douglass, because I read Up From Slavery, and he referenced Douglass. It's kind of cool. There is a link between Lincoln and Lincoln and Teddy and George Washington, Booker T. Washington, and Frederick Douglass. One's direct. Frederick Douglass came and spoke there. They got to know him. He looked up to him. And for TR at 6 years old, his dad said, come into the city. Abraham Lincoln's body's coming down Broadway. And he brought him to his grandfather's house, and they were able to see it.
That iconic picture of Theodore Roosevelt, a young Theodore Roosevelt in the window overlooking the procession of Lincoln's body down Broadway.
Right. I did a stand-up for the special on that from the building to where Broadway was, which is now full of skateboarders and
It's a different time.
Yeah, it's a different time. There were no Ubers back then, just taxis. And that's one thing people, and I point that out in the book. Right, but there were Uber Eats.
There wasn't even an app for taxis.
Right.
You just had to stand outside and whistle for one.
Can you imagine?
Which young Theodore Roosevelt did.
Right. The good news about living in that time, you don't have to worry about forgetting a password. No passwords.
There were no passwords.
Right, just Netflix.
Not even the BlackBerry. Blackberries were wide open.
Right.
You lose your BlackBerry,
Right.
someone's got your banking information.
And I talk about it at page 71. I talk about I go into banking and BlackBerries, a little detail. You know that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, come on. And
Right.
and there was one quote that I wanted. This I thought was so profound and interesting from Theodore Roosevelt's point of view in terms of his frustration before he ascended to the presidency, where he could try and make a difference with some of the suggestions that Booker T. Washington was making to him. And he said, "The man who occupies the vice presidency may at any moment be everything, but meanwhile he is practically nothing." Did they stick TR there just to let him just blow in the wind until his political
the
career
answer
was
to
done?
that.
Yes.
The answer is absolutely yes, because he breaks things. He had became governor after a war hero. As he leaves this being, he was assistant secretary of the Navy. This war breaks out and goes, "I'm out." "What do you mean you're out?" "I'm signing up." "No, you're not." And then when they finally go, "Okay, you can sign up, you can go as a general." He goes, "I'm not a general." He goes, "Are you kidding? I don't know anything. I'm just a well-meaning, I like to be an officer, make me a colonel, hire a general." And he went in there and he fought and he comes back. He's a war hero in Montauk. And they go, "Listen, we need you to run for governor." They didn't know he was not going to abide by any of the old rules. He was going to question everything. He was not going to take any appointments that were assigned to him. And they said, "Okay, you're really popular. You'd win re-election, but I got something more important for you. William McKinley needs a running mate." And by the way, when McKinley gets shot, he survives for a couple of weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And first off, they got to find Teddy Roosevelt. Where's the vice president?
Top of a mountain.
Right, top of a mountain, hanging out. No BlackBerries back then. Or they had BlackBerries, no reception.
No service, exactly.
No service. Because everyone complained about the towers. We're having fun.
We want metal, we want trees,
Right.
Teddy.
How is Kennedy going to save the world if I keep making stuff up? But they get him and they get him off and he's like, "Okay, I'm going to be fine. He's going to be fine. He's going to tell you the president shot." The next time they find him, they go, he's dead. You got to get back."
2:15 in the morning.
Right. So he's from train to horseback, whatever it is.
Had to switch horses.
Right.
It wasn't pretty.
He gets there and he liked McKinley.
Yeah.
He respected him. Plus, McKinley's a war hero too.
Mm-hmm.
And McKinley loved this guy, Booker T. Washington. Booker T. Washington has a goal. This is the other thing. Someone just asked me, Carol Markowitz just interviewed me on a podcast. She does not save the world, so she's no competition.
Not yet.
Right.
She can get there.
I don't even set a goal. She doesn't know if it's worth saving. More on that later. I encourage you to book her.
She's in Florida. She didn't care. She's like, "Florida's great. Bye."
Well, she was smart.
Yeah.
All right, she got out.
Absolutely.
Right. So
McKinley loved.
She said, what did
Washington.
you learn from Booker T. Washington that you, or these guys?" I go, I'll tell you one thing. Booker T. Washington was the precursor to Norman Vincent Peale, Napoleon Hill, Anthony Robbins, all those Think and Grow Rich people and the power of positive thinking. Because one of his dreams was, he goes, when this institution, he goes, for this to matter, I need the president to make my commencement address. This is when he has 35 people in one beaten down shack. He would end up moving down the road and getting 100 acres. And the guy, he had to have students hold the umbrella over his head while he taught because there were holes in the roof. And he was dreaming, visualizing a president one day giving the commencement address. And next thing you know, he goes and sees McKinley. Mm-hmm. And then they go, he met McKinley on who was in Atlanta. And they said, "I'd love you to make my commencement address." And he's like, "Okay, I'll think about it." Then he went and saw him. And he sits there and he said, "I'd like you to do that." And one of McKinley's aides says, "You need the black vote. This is the most popular man in America, black man in America. So you do it." And McKinley showed up and he was like, "I cannot believe what I'm seeing. I didn't think this was possible." And it reminds me of Benjamin Franklin said the same thing. He had slaves. He thought there was an inferior race until he sees an educated African Americans. He said, "I blew it. What was I thinking?" Smartest man maybe ever, and most worldly. And at 74 years old, he's still helping write the Constitution. And he's out there and he said, "I was wrong. I'm going to become, the rest of my life, I'm going to be an abolitionist." So it shows you can grow in life, but also shows what you visualize in life, no matter how big or small your goals are, personal and professional. Put it in paper, visualize it, and you never know however it happens, things will happen for you if you want it enough. Your whys are great enough. Why? Because he didn't want to be famous, Booker T. Washington. He wanted to help as many people as possible. That's why he wanted McKinley there, not to make Booker T. Washington famous, but to make Tuskegee matter, and then make more Tuskegees, historical black colleges.
What is his legacy?
His legacy is education and trade, and also overcoming. One of the quotes I have, I think that everyone can learn, and I just brought it up before, and I think it's probably, this is what I read to Mike Rowe, because people tend to make excuses, and I just had it. Let me see. I'm picturing finding it. Here it goes. With few exceptions, the Negro youth must work harder and perform his tasks even better than a white youth in order to secure recognition. But out of the hard work and unusual struggle through which he is compelled to pass, he gets a strength and a confidence that one misses should their pathway be comparatively smooth by reason of birth and race. It's going to be tougher, but when you work your way through it, you're going to be better. So it's pretty tough when people are telling you, don't use that bathroom, don't go to my school, don't go on my highways, don't go on my path, don't marry a white woman, don't date a black man. At the same time, yeah, it is tough. It is dangerous. There are people that don't want us to be free. But when you work your way through it and navigate your way through and prove your critics wrong, you're going to be a better person. And that's when you were born a slave at 9 years old and you remember being called to the big house, the central house, and a Union soldier reading the Emancipation Proclamation and saying you're free. That's starting at the bottom, isn't it? No dad has to decide what he's going to do that day for dinner and then tomorrow for lunch. And then what am I going to do to make a living? They headed to West Virginia, work in the salt mines. He willed his way towards an education.
Reunited with his stepdad, Wash.
Yeah. He was Wash Ferguson, and he was the one who put him in the salt mines. He said, I'd like to go to school. They go, I need the money. You can't go to school. Well, how does a guy who thirsts for education go to school? Well, one day...
Split shifts.
Right. But you're right. One day he hears his friends complaining about this woman, Mrs. Ruffner, Viola Ruffner, and she's impossible to please. I'm quitting this job. You're quitting this job. What are you talking about? This gets me out of the salt mines. I'm kind of claustrophobic anyway. He goes and meets her, and he realizes she's not mean. She just wants things done right. And what she sees in him is somebody who thirsts to learn and grow. And she said he had boundless energy. And he said, what do you need? You've been so great with me. He goes, I'd love to learn to read. And she starts helping him. And when he gets into Hampton, when he arrives at Hampton College, the way he finally proves himself, Kennedy, is they say to him, you're a mess. I can't put you in here. Comes back again. Look at you. You have no background. You have no shoes. You're not clean. Finally, he comes back in. He goes, well, I need a janitor. Show me you can clean this room. Mrs. Ruffner taught him how to clean. And they were so good, they go, I want to watch you. Who helped you with this? I want to watch you do the other. Then they cleaned the whole school and said, you can go to school at night, but you're going to clean this place during the day. And that guy becomes the best teacher, the best student, the best teacher. And when Tuskegee needs someone to lead it, this General Armstrong, a white guy, recommends this 24-year-old
Another
black
war
teacher.
Hero.
But all in vision.
Yes.
It's all visual. I need to read. I learned to write.
But what is it about
Things
some people
happen.
that they have this, it's not only a desire, but a need that's so deep within them to pay it forward? Because obviously what happened with him, he replicated that experience for other people. And that doesn't happen to everyone. Like, people oftentimes, when they struggle, they emerge with bitterness and resentment. But that didn't happen there. And he made it his life's work to make sure that when he met people who wanted to learn and work as hard as he did, that he was going to assist them.
First, by the way, great observation. He also would work in the fields in the beginning. He says, no, you're going to work. I'm going to work with you. So they're chopping down trees, doing things, and he's leading it. So they go, okay, if this guy's going to lead it, I'm going to do it. And he was authentic. Number two, I think he was naturally an optimistic person. And number three, he wanted to give people hope. Because for some reason, I do think some people are born where it's always raining and it's always gray, and some people always see the bright side. I think he was driven to matter, and I think he had important mentors along the way. he had a teacher at Hampton College that basically taught him how to enunciate and speak in front of people and command an audience. White. He had Mrs. Ruffner, white. General Armstrong, white. So any resentment that he might have had or inequity, these people saw him as a great, someone who's like a diamond that needed to be polished. Mm-hmm. They didn't see him as a black guy. And if he had resentment towards white people, how does it explain how he got there? It doesn't mean there was no racism. So when he got there, he said, I got to spread the word. And I think it's an important moment instead of hoarding and getting a big mansion. And they obviously would say to him, Andrew Carnegie would say to him, I'm paying you. I'll take care of this. You're working too hard. Go on vacation. You don't need to do this. I'll put someone in your place. He said, absolutely not. If you're going to give me money, it's going right to the institution. And I think people appreciated that. He could have lived in the North or lived in Europe and treated like a king. Mm-hmm. But he said, no, I have to do it in the South. That's what made it so special. But also, Kennedy, as you know, it also brought critics. They say you're too accommodating. You're too compliant. You just witnessed lynchings in 2 or 3 places, obviously unjust because of some person being uppity with whites or mistakenly being accused of harassment or dating them. And he said, why didn't you do anything? He said, because I have to worry about this institution. If I become an activist for each individual cause, my institution fails. I become a lightning rod. This whole place gets burned down. Mm-hmm. But what he would do is under the wire, get these people lawyers, help out their families. When people would come up to him and say, I'm being chased, it'll look like he blew them off. But what he would do is come with me out the back door. He's not here. There's 2 famous cases. And they said, how could you let him out? And they would write bad things about him in the papers. But they found letters thanking him later because he knew it was in the best interest of the greater good for him to not be somebody associated with racism and polarization. Mm-hmm. He knew it was wrong. But at this point, the best thing for him is to worry about that college and grow thousands of more people that will change thousands of other perceptions of Americans and people abroad. And he did.
I mean, obviously, he and Theodore Roosevelt needed each other, but what did they have in common? The more you read about them, because obviously they come from very, very different backgrounds. Theodore Roosevelt he came from a family of means. He had 6 children. He went to Harvard. He was a fancy lad. This was not hard scrabble for him, but what did he and Booker T have in common? What was the commonality you found?
Well, number one, they both struggled when they were young. I mean, they used to do this thing. They didn't think he would survive asthma. And it wasn't just
Roosevelt.
Teddy Roosevelt. So I asked his great-grandson, who is now in his 70s, maybe 80s, probably 80s, and he remembers playing at Sagamore Hill with Teddy's wife still living in Sagamore Hill. For him, that was the place he grew up in. And she would explain that, and Edith knew when he was younger, said it was so bad, they thought this was a cure. They would make him drink liquor. Mm-hmm. They would blow cigar smoke in his mouth, in his face. But they thought he was going to die because he was so bad. He went to school, He was probably 90 pounds.
Yeah.
So he knows what it was like, number one, isolated, no friends. When he did go out, because he couldn't go to regular school, because he was always homeschooled, because he was always so sickly, he'd get beat up a lot, okay? So he had a situation where he worshipped his parents, but he didn't have a normal childhood. He had to be doted on. When he finally gets to Harvard, he knows absolutely no one, not really great intellect, not a great body. He was able to weave himself in. And then he sees himself very common with the common guy. Why? Because when he became police commissioner, he didn't sit there and say to the cops, hey, let's go out for a party tonight. He gave them a sense of discipline, sent up their first ever academy, told them that everyone's going to wear a gun, you're going to wear this uniform. And then he went and spent his time trying to get immigrants who had no rights out of the cigar shops and gave them out of the slums and exposed them and put them from the underclass to at least the lower class. And then when you think about what made him special is that he experienced where Booker T. Washington experienced extreme poverty as a slave and then knows what it was like to work in a salt mine and work his way up, go 400 miles with absolutely no transportation and walk half of it, hop onto wagons on the other half, and then finally arrive. Teddy Roosevelt was someone who took his wealth, put it aside, and when he became a rancher and a cowboy in the Midwest that weren't even states yet, they were territories, and was with one of the guys. So he knows what it's like to be a slave, and then Booker T. Washington knows what it's like to be a worker. Then he knows what it's like to go to a college. Then he knows what it's like to be with the ultra-rich, and never forgot where he came from. Teddy starts with the ultra-rich, knows what it's like in the working class, goes up to the higher class, and then when he gets into position of power, he takes on the corporations and
patronage.
And patronage, and says, no, you're going to share the wealth. That would be something that maybe the antithesis of what people think a Republican would do now. He would be before the unions then. I don't know if he'd be for him now, but it was for the working man. But yet he was anything but. He'd go into these bureaucracies, and his first job in Washington was to basically gut it and get people accountable for their jobs. They would just sit there and keep it for generations. And he gutted, made people put in an honest day's work. Now, if you come from a person of wealth, if you're an area of wealth, you don't really know the 12, 14-hour day to make ends meet. And sooner or later, they crossed paths from extreme wealth because Booker T. Washington ended up being a person of wealth and hanging out with the upper class crowd. He left the upper class crowd for the working class crowd and was able to navigate both exceptionally well. I think he was probably the most prepared president, even though he was 50, than anybody else, 48, than anybody else. Teddy Roosevelt knew the Midwest, knew the rich, knew the poor, knew law enforcement.
South. His mom was from the South.
And he also, that's very important, and he also knew fight in war, the military. He was patriotic. He also wrote the book of War of 1812. They say that it's still virtually a virtual handbook that the Navy still uses to teach their people about early Navy operations and the code. So I just think there's somebody who started diametrically different, won over certain hurdles. Obviously, you're born a slave, it's worse than asthma. Don't let anyone watch Kennedy Saves the World and say Brian says asthma is bad as slavery. It is not true. But near death is near death.
Yeah.
And he was near dying. And when he got an episode, they didn't know what to do. They just sit there and stare and wonder if their kid's going to start breathing again. I mean, that's pretty brutal.
Yeah, but the transformation that both took upon themselves and then realized what they needed in each other, it makes for a fantastic read. And your book's so well written, so readable, and full of joy and curiosity. So keep them coming, Brian.
All right.
I love it.
I think I'm retiring after this.
No, you're not.
I'm retiring after this.
You have many more books than you, and I can't wait to see what you write about next.
This is a beautiful studio. You built it yourself?
I did. Yeah, I'm like... A lot of people say I'm the Booker T. Washington of Fox because they sent like engineers and lighting people in here. I was like, no, I'm going to do it.
Really? That's not what I heard. I heard that you had engineers.
I meant to do it.
You meant to do it. Right.
Yeah,
right.
Well, I wouldn't say I would have, but
right. It didn't really come. Nothing about that.
I was
true.
busy.
Right. Right. Now you're defensive. All right. Again, what people our critics going to run with? Brian Kilmeade says that asthma is worse than slavery.
Well,
I
it's
did
in the
not
book.
say that. Yeah.
It's page 71 and a half. Teddy and Booker T. Get it now. Order it. BrianKilmeade.com. That's where you get the.
And after that, by the way, just go to BrianKilmeade.com. Find out where it'll be.
Yes.
They're going to be everywhere.
Yeah, you're answering questions. You're taking names, and you're putting people to work.
Right.
Building your house, which I think is very brave of you.
From the start. I wish I had some skills. As I close that book, the one thing I thought of, I really can't do much. Because I would have disappointed him. They're like, math, science, but you're not a good blacksmith. You're a terrible agriculturist. That's one thing about me. I try to be a blacksmith. No openings.
I mean, what about a farrier?
Right?
Yeah.
What about a furrier?
Yeah, but you could do both.
Right. But
little
no
shoes and opulent coats.
Right.
I look forward to it, Brian.
Does this podcast ever really end, or
Nope.
you just more people just weave in? It's just like a party that never stops. Do you drink on the air? Do you drink with this?
This is water.
Oh, okay. How do you get 3 cameras? I have 1 camera.
That's shocking to me.
Well, I have 2 cameras.
If I come in here next podcast and one of these is missing, I know where to go.
It'll be me. Kenny saves the world, but not all the cameras.
Thank you, Brian Kilmeade.
Thank you for having me on.
You're a wonderful historian and human being.
Really?
Yes. I appreciate you. I'm going to sniff my Sharpie.
Right.
This has been Kennedy Saves the World, along with Brian Kilmeade. I'm Kennedy.
Listen ad-free with a Fox News Podcast Plus subscription on Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Prime members can listen to this show ad-free on the Amazon Music app.
Oh, go ahead and leave me a review while you're there. I'd love to hear what you have to say. You've been listening to Kennedy Saves the World on the Fox News Podcast Network.